It feels like you blink and bam, there's a whole new set of laws being debated, passed. It's a lot.
Uh-huh. It really is hard to keep up sometimes.
And if you're anything like me, you sometimes just want someone to, like, distill it all down, right?
Yeah.
Give you the essence of what's happening without getting totally lost in the jargon.
Yeah, exactly. Cut through the noise.
Well, that's pretty much what we're aiming for today. We're taking a closer look at some recent legislative action in India that's, well, generating quite a bit of buzz.
Right, the Waqf Amendment Bill and also the Muslim Waqf Repeal Bill.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, Prime Minister Modi has described these changes as a real turning point. That's his phrase for social and economic fairness. Big claim.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Definitely a significant framing.
So our mission, if you will, for this deep dive is to really try and understand what these bills are actually about. What could they mean, both for India and maybe even offering some insights into similar systems elsewhere.
We've got some interesting material to work with, giving us a few different angles on this. So yeah, let's get into it.
Okay, so before we jump into the new laws, maybe we should start with the basics. What exactly is the Waqf system?
Absolutely. It's vital to understand the foundation here. So Waqf, for anyone hearing this term maybe for the first time, it's essentially a long-standing practice within Muslim communities.
Okay.
Think of it as a kind of charitable endowment. People donate or designate properties, could be land, buildings, even, financial assets.
Right.
And they dedicate them for religious or charitable purposes. So this could support anything from mosques, schools, madrasas.
Helping the poor, orphans, that sort of thing.
Exactly. A really wide range of community needs. It's been around for centuries.
So it definitely sounds like a system that started with, really good intentions, a way for communities to support their own, look after the less fortunate.
Indeed. The initial vision, the core idea behind Waqf was very much rooted in philanthropy and social welfare. But,
There's always a but, isn't there?
well, yeah. As with any system that evolves over such a long time, complexities, challenges, they inevitably creep in.
Yeah.
And over time, the administration of these Waqf properties, and we're talking about a huge number, quite substantial value across India, it unfortunately became, well, susceptible to issues.
And this seems to be where some of the sources we looked at really hone in this idea of a lack of accountability, almost painting a picture of the system becoming kind of opaque, like a black hole even.
That's a good way to put it. That lack of transparency, that lack of clear oversight, it led to various problems cropping up.
Such as?
Well, you started hearing more reports, more concerns about mismanagement of these properties, instances of encroachment, people illegally occupying Waqf land, even allegations of corruption.
Wow, okay. So the original purpose gets undermined.
Pretty much. The core goal of benefiting the intended people, the poor, the students, whoever was sometimes getting lost, it just became really difficult to track how these valuable properties were being managed and whether the benefits were actually reaching the people they were supposed to.
You can see how that would happen. A system designed for good, but without strong checks and balances.
Ah.
It can falter.
Exactly. If those mechanisms for accountability aren't robust enough, things can go wrong.
Right. So that neatly brings us to these recent legislative changes. Prime Minister Modi is presenting these new bills as like a direct answer to these very problems. What's his core argument? Why now?
His central argument, the narrative he's putting forward, is that these amendments are specifically designed to bring that much-needed transparency and accountability back into the Waqf system.
Well,
He's essentially framed it as an effort to, clean house, to fix the problems that have sort of built up over the years. The stated aim is to modernize the legal framework governing Waqfs and make sure these properties are managed effectively and, crucially, in line with their original charitable intent.
and he's been pretty specific about who he thinks will benefit most from this cleanup, right? It's not just a general sort of improvement.
Precisely. He specifically highlighted Muslim women, people from economically backward Muslim communities, and also Pasmana Muslims.
Pasmana Muslims. Can you just clarify that term for listeners?
Sure. Pasmana essentially refers to Muslims belonging to socially and economically disadvantaged backward communities or castes within the broader Muslim population in India.
Got it. Okay. So the argument is that these particular groups haven't always received the full benefits the Waqf system could offer.
That's the claim. The idea is that by improving the governance, the oversight, the transparency, these marginalized segments of society are the ones who stand to gain the most.
So the Prime Minister is clearly positioning this as, a significant step towards greater social justice, inclusivity. He's using phrases like creating a modern framework, fostering a stronger, more inclusive, and more compassionate India.
It definitely fits that narrative. He's presenting these legislative changes not just as like boring administrative updates, but as a fundamental reform, one aimed at empowering marginalized groups and ensuring these WAF resources actually serve their intended purpose.
Which, of course, aligns with his government's broader messaging about reaching out to and uplifting disadvantaged groups.
It does, yes. It connects directly to that broader political agenda.
Now, important point. The passage of these bills wasn't exactly smooth sailing or universally cheered, right? Our sources suggest there was likely skepticism, maybe even outright opposition from, well, the opposition parties.
That's generally the case with significant legislation, isn't it?
True. And the process itself seems quite rapid. The Rajya Sabha, the upper house, approved them just a day after the Lok Sabha, the lower house. What does that speed, combined with potential opposition, tell us?
Well, a rapid legislative passage like that, especially on something with potential social and, religious implications, it often raises questions about the depth of deliberation, the extent of consensus building across the political aisle.
Right. Were all voices really heard?
Exactly. The opposition's reservations likely came from various places, maybe questioning the government's real motives or having doubts about whether these changes will actually work in practice, or perhaps just feeling like their own perspectives weren't really given enough weight during the drafting and debate.
But didn't the Prime Minister mention input being considered? From MPs, committees, even the public. How do we square that with the quick passage?
It's tricky. It's part of the complex dance of the legislative process. Yes, consultations might happen, some feedback might be incorporated, but the final decisions, the pace, that suggests the government was pretty determined to get these bills through, perhaps without major alterations based on dissenting views.
So consultation mentioned, but maybe not deeply influential on the final shape or speed.
It's possible. Governments often highlight consultation, but the actual impact of that consultation can vary wildly. The speed certainly signals a strong government resolve here.
Okay, so we have the stated goals, more transparency, helping marginalized groups, and we have a legislative journey. Some input claim, but a very quick passage.
Yeah.
Now, the really critical question, the million-dollar question, I guess. What actually happens now on the ground? Is this legislation truly going to be the watershed moment or turning point that's being claimed?
Yes, the implementation question. And this is where, we need a healthy dose of realism.
Okay.
As some of the materials we looked at quite rightly point out, even implementing seemingly simple administrative reforms in a country as huge and diverse as India, it can be a massive task.
Right.
So when you're talking about reshaping the management of a system with such deep historical roots involving countless properties and stakeholders, the challenges just multiply.
I remember one analogy from the material that really stuck with me. It was something like expecting perfect, smooth reform in a centuries-old property system is a bit like expecting perfect queues everywhere when even simple things can get chaotic. It just highlights the sheer practical hurdles.
That's a great analogy, actually, because the legal framework might be new, it might be on paper, but translating that into effective change on the ground, that needs robust mechanisms.
Like what, specifically?
Well, things like setting up genuinely effective oversight bodies, ensuring real transparency in how WAF properties are managed day to day, creating clear pathways for the intended beneficiaries, the women, the poor, the Pasmanda communities, to actually access the benefits they're supposed to get.
And without that?
Without strong enforcement, without genuine commitment from everyone involved, there's a very real risk, a risk that these laws, however well-intentioned they might seem on paper, just don't lead to the tangible changes being promised. They could end up being ignored or poorly implemented.
It's that classic gap, isn't it, between policy and practice? We've seen it so many times before good laws are passed. But the implementation falters or faces unexpected roadblocks, and the real difference is minimal.
Precisely. The ultimate success of these WAF amendments is going to hinge entirely on the nitty-gritty details of how they are put into practice.
So key questions remain.
Absolutely. Will there be independent, empowered bodies overseeing things? Will there be real safeguards against corruption and mismanagement? Critically, will the voices of the intended beneficiaries actually be heard and their interests protected in the real world? These are the factors that will decide if this legislation actually achieves what it says it will.
Okay, so pulling it all together then. On one hand, we have this potential for a significant positive reform, a chance to clean up a system that by many accounts, had flaws, and to better direct its resources towards those who need them most.
Mm.
But on the other hand, we have these huge, very real challenges tied to implementing such big changes in a complex environment.
That sums it up well. The basic intent, bringing more transparency to a system that had become murky, that seems like a positive step. You have to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
But, and it's a big but, the real impact depends so heavily on effective implementation. It's really a wait-and-see situation. We need to watch how things actually unfold on the ground before we can judge the true success.
And that really brings us back to you, our listeners. As you heard, there's potential here, definitely. But so much hinges on what happens next. So a question to ponder. What do you think are the most critical things that need to be in place? What's needed to ensure these legislative changes actually lead to real, meaningful socioeconomic benefits for the communities they're supposed to serve?
Yeah, what kind of oversight or accountability mechanisms would be most effective in your view?
It's a vital thing to think about.
It really is. Reforming these kinds of long-standing systems, it takes sustained effort, it takes genuine commitment to the goals, and crucially, the active involvement, maybe even the empowerment of the beneficiaries themselves. That plus those robust, transparent accountability measures, those will be key.
Absolutely key in determining if this really moves the needle on social justice in the long run.
Couldn't agree more.
So we definitely encourage you all to keep following this story as it develops. Look for more information, more analysis on how these bills are actually being implemented and what kind of impact they seem to be having. Because, ultimately that's where the real story lies.
Yep. The real test is just beginning.
Well, thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.